Bullshit.
Pretend for a moment we've entered a parallel universe free of bullshit and full of bold solutions. That's what the No BS Marketing Show is all about. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich. Our guest today is Don Haddad of Citizens Bank, but first, let's cut the bullshit. When a client said a coworker drank the Kool-Aid to describe his overzealous company loyalty, I said it's a shame Jim Jones is remembered at all. He replied, "Who's Jim Jones?" Jim Jones was the founder and leader of the People's Temple, best known for the mass murder-suicide in November 1978 of 913 of its members in Jonestown, Guyana, by drinking cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. Another term, magic bullet, originally referred to an enchanted bullet obtained through a contract with the devil in German folklore. It was also used to describe Arlen Specter's theory on the bullet that struck President Kennedy in the back, exited through his throat, and then struck Texas Governor John Connally. Today, it's the name of a blender company. Sometimes we remember the gist of the phrase but mix up the wording. She was champing at the bit is about horses figuratively chewing away on a metal mouthpiece, which would be showing impatience or eagerness. But many people say chomping at the bit. In other instances, pop culture gives new meaning to an old story. If you've seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you might remember the movie rather than the theme of Arthurian literature and Christian lore. The point is we remember and use big ideas from these stories to teach lessons, make our point, and motivate others. But why do some stories spread throughout the course of time while others are quickly forgotten? Those that make a lasting impact share some common traits. First, they strip the main idea to its core, make it easy to understand the major takeaway. Second, they explain the idea in human terms, help others relate to the story. 3, capture people's attention. Different can be better than better. Think about that. Different can be better than better. Make it believable. Your target audience has to think the big idea can be true. And number 5, stir emotions. The more we feel, the more we remember. And if you think you can ignore these tips, you've got another think coming. Yes, you heard me right. The original phrase was, if you think that, you've got another think coming. Thing or think doesn't matter. The major takeaway is clear. The messaging lives on. The No BS Show is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/nobs. Try a book like The Girl with the Lower Back Tattoo by Amy Schumer. You can download it for free today. Go to audibletrial.com/nobs. Again, that's audibletrial.com/nobs for your free audiobook. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Our guest today is Don Haddad, Senior Vice President of Citizens Bank. Don has more than 25 years of senior leadership experience in the banking industry. He was past president of both the Pittsburgh chapters of the Association for Corporate Growth and also the Commercial Finance Association. One of Don's current passions is developing the next generation of leaders and bankers. He'll tell us more about how he does that on today's show. Don, welcome to the show.
Hey, David. Thank you very much for having me.
You laughed a couple times during the drink the Kool-Aid, magic bullet, Monty Python. What were your thoughts?
They're just great memories of Monty Python, The Holy Grail was a movie you have to see. It's with throughout generations. I mean, I just can't say more about that. That was a great movie. Drinking the Kool-Aid. We all have different Kool-Aid. Jim Jones had his Kool-Aid. I guess you'll hear more about it. I grew up in North Side, so Pittsburgh and everything about Pittsburgh is sort of my Kool-Aid.
I love it, and that's partly why you're here, because you're hugely successful at Citizens Bank, had a great career, but you are truly a Western Pennsylvania and more specifically Pittsburgh guy. But let's start by having you walk us through your educational background and your career journey.
It's been a long journey. It's been a great journey, and as we'll talk about, there's been a lot of people who had their hands in my journey. But product, as I mentioned, of Northside. I grew up right on top of the stadiums, what people would call Lower Perrysville. From there, a product of one of 6 kids. hardworking, blue-collar family, probably back in the 60s. Two parents, both worked. My dad was a mailman during the day and a baker part-time at night, what he did in the Navy. My mother was a registered nurse. So from very early on, we were pretty independent. And being the oldest, I guess I've had that oldest child syndrome, whatever that is. Moved to Bellevue right before high school. At Bellevue High School, got a great education there, and it was time for college. And I was looking for a college, and I knew, just based on the product of what my upbringing, I needed to get a degree on something I can walk out and work with. For me to get a liberal arts degree and then figure out what's next was not something I had in mind. Looked around, and at that time, we're talking 1975. IUP, the Eberly School, had a fantastic reputation for producing, especially in my window, Western PA, great business leaders. And I was fortunate to have a number of neighbors who I was not afraid to reach out to in high school and say, hey, can you take me to work someday in the summer? And I'd get my suit on and I'd come downtown and go to work with them and introduce some of their leaders, and had an idea. So from there, good with numbers, looking at various schools. IUP, very well renowned for its business school back then, and it is today. First was sort of a teacher's college, but the business school was great. More specifically, what I thought was the accounting and finance program. Very good with numbers all through school. Again, being a product of the North Side, my SATs had pretty great business scores. The English scores weren't as great. So I knew from there, the accounting / finance was the track I was going to take. And from there, went to IUP, visited IUP, was playing around about playing football, not playing football, and decided, my life work at football was done, and it was time to get an education and get to work. IUP started out as an accounting major and had a great teacher up there. But I'm not one to follow all the rules. And so when I had to show up every day with my number 2 pencil, my white 6-inch roller, my little special eraser, that didn't seem like it cut it for me. But I knew that anything I did, the accounting background was key. And even though I think sometimes this teacher got under my skin, I was smart enough to take her 2 more times because she's going to give me the phenomenal background I know I needed if I was going to go into the finance end, which I did do. Ended up, majoring in finance, had a minor in both accounting and economics, and that served me well. My entire career, I don't know what the issue is, but I sort of get pulled into jobs. I was never one to go out and really, sit there and say, I'm going to reach this one and go. Mine was more of a backdoor approach, and it wasn't on purpose. It just seemed to happen that way. And I was never really big on blowing my horn, but people would come and recognize, the body of work I did and what I was doing at school, and they'd come out and grab me. First job, I was with a small bank, sort of a recession. I used to go to my buddy's family Christmas party every year, and his brother-in-law was an executive of one of the banks in Pittsburgh, and from the time I was in 11th grade, said, when you graduate from college, I'm hiring you. He hired me and, went right into the banking world. I took a little detour. A guy I met somewhere grabbed me and pulled me to Rockwell International. And at that time, Rockwell International was a Fortune 50 company here in Pittsburgh. So just a phenomenal reputation. Went to Rockwell for a number of years. I was getting my master's. And you always sort of compete with somebody when you're a master's program. There was a guy I thought was brilliant, and every day if I got anywhere near his test score, I was pretty happy with myself. And we got done, and he said, let's grab lunch next week. And I'm saying, well, why? And he goes, because we're going to hire you. And he went out and had lunch with them, and he was with a company called Maryland National Industrial Finance Corporation. And I know right now you hear a lot of real sexy things about all the private equity firms and leverage buyouts and management buyouts, but we were doing that in 1982. And I got involved in the ground floor of that industry of financing, levered companies, financing leverage buyouts, and getting very comfortable with that whole acquisition arena. From there, that morphed into Mellon Bank grabbing me. And I was probably one of the first people hired at Mellon after the good bank, bad bank scenario. I think it was October 1st, the no hiring ban went off, and my letter came out October 1st. Joined Mellon, was at Mellon for probably 8 years. And it seems like my career is all in 7 or 8 year increments. From there was an opportunity to run an office here for National Bank of Canada. And again, I didn't reach out for it. I got a call from the head guy who ran this region for National Bank of Canada. And he just said, why haven't you called me? Why aren't I talking to you? Why don't you look at this position? And it was a great position. I met him one day, all day for an all-day interview. At the end of that interview, he said, when I offer you the job on Friday, you're going to take it. And so, again, continually get pulled. When National Bank of Canada was sold, it was at the same time when Citizens Bank was buying Mellon. And as we all look at Mellon Bank, Frank Collett used to say that Mellon was not a bank, it was a financial service company with a bank as one of its core assets. And when Mellon divested its core asset, the bank, to Citizens Bank, I did a lot of work with Citizens Bank people in Boston via National Bank of Canada. And they come down and grabbed me and said, hey, we really want you to come and work with us and help us develop this Western PA territory via Citizens. And so I've been at Citizens since about a month after the acquisition. The Citizens acquisition of Mellon closed in December 2001. National Bank of Canada's all U.S. operations was closed in January 2001. And the day I shut the door down at National Bank of Canada's office here, that next day, I had a letter from Citizens Bank. So that's sort of the little journey I've been on over the last 30 years.
Quite a journey, and I think there's a number of key points. Is at a young age, you knew the background in accounting and finance would be relevant. You also were mature enough to see a professor that sort of, you said, got under your skin, but you took her 2 more times. You also adjusted from accounting to finance, which might seem like a subtle move, but is a pretty big one from a tactical versus strategic standpoint. So talk a little bit about some of those moves in the early going.
I knew no matter what I did, accounting is the basis that you need. And so for you business students out there right now, if you're going to get in business, I don't care if it's accounting, finance, marketing, personnel, you need to understand accounting. You need to understand what a balance sheet and an income statement and cash flow statements look like. Those, the accounting is the building blocks of what everything in business is based off of. Finance takes it to a different level, and finance gave me the ability to be a little more creative. I mean, you look at accounting, and I don't want to, stereotype it. I mean, initially you're getting involved with books and records and verifying and proving numbers. Finance got to take it to a different level, a little more creativity. I mean, you can go into, as I said, into banking. You can go into real estate. You can go into different areas of finance, insurance. I mean, there's a whole world of stuff. And we found that, at Citizens that, our best employees have that combination. And we're not married to, accounting major and finance minor or finance major and accounting minor. We know the combination of that accounting and finance is really what makes a good employee in our group.
So then talk about jumping to Rockwell International, because that's the one point of your career. I guess there's 2 of them that are a little bit different than some of the other ones, but let's take Rockwell.
Rockwell International was interesting. I guess when I got into banking at the first point, I was more in the branch system. And, back those days, I walked into a branch and I was like the acting assistant manager of a branch. And I didn't really know if the branch made sense for me. And this is when you sort of persistence and just staying at it. We didn't have computers. We weren't able to hit 3 buttons and send resumes out. But Rockwell was a company I targeted in college. I had some dialogue with them. I got a letter back, and it had, Bill Smith's name on it, and his phone number. So every month I had 4 or 5 of those companies I called every month just to keep in touch with them. And the gentleman called me up one night on a Friday night and says, "Hey, a position just opened. I think it's perfect for you." And that sort of took me to Rockwell. One thing I will say, and a shout out to my grandmother, when I left Rockwell International and joined a company called Maryland National Industrial Finance Corporation, she could not understand that. Because Rockwell was, it was one of the largest, longest standing companies in Western PA, and how I could leave that kind of a bedrock company and go to something that's dealt with leveraged buyouts in 1980 something. That didn't fit with her.
And so did you ever win her over about that
I think I did. Yeah, I think I did. I mean, I think, it's all about, I've always been a believer is, you got to build that tree slow and let it grow. A lot of times I see a lot of people that it's all about how fast I can get there. I know I was with a young person recently, and the comment was, I need to go as fast as I can so I make my first $100,000, annually. And I'm going, well, you need to build the building blocks first, and then that $100,000 or $200,000 will be more sustainable.
Absolutely.
And my goal was to build that building block, take it slow, really develop it. And sometimes I took one step backwards to go two forward.
Well, talk about being on the ground floor of the leverage buyouts and that whole really industry that's changed the world.
It has changed the world, and I think it's something which is needed. I walked in on day one, and I had the early banking experience. Rockwell was a great experience. I was in the finance department. I sort of had a free reign of doing some different things as a young, 23-year-old at Rockwell International. I was one that they could give a task to, and I would get it done, and I'd do it, I guess, pretty good. And that would be whether it was Rockwell looking at acquisitions, Rockwell analyzing competition, Rockwell analyzing customers. So I was always into that, more of a research, more of an analytics on a company. So when you walked into Maryland National and looking at leveraged buyouts, it was the same thing. I was still looking at companies. I was still analyzing companies. And it was sort of an easier fit. You just sort of walked into that. It wasn't doing a whole lot different than I was doing at Rockwell. And then also Maryland National had a twist. It was more of an asset-based lender, which was more of a specialized niche in the finance world. And so I'm at Rockwell, and I'm analyzing the customer base receivables, the supplier base payables, analyzing the competition and those things. That's exactly what you do at a bank. I mean, you're analyzing companies. You're basically sort of peeling the peel off of an orange and getting underneath what you see and what's really there.
The No BS Marketing Podcast with Dave Mastovich is brought to you by Mass Solutions. Put our 3-step No BS process to work for you. Visit masssolutions.biz today to take your marketing to another level. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.
Then you go from the leverage buyout at Maryland to the Mellon Bank situation. And at that point, you're at Mellon for 8 years. You roll into more banking. Talk about the transition when you went to Mellon. What was different? What was the same?
Well, it was different because now I'm in a big corporation. It's a big machine. And being in a big machine, you got to deal a lot more with internal politics. You got to deal, at Maryland National, I was a freelance. I had 3 or 4 states I ran across. I spent a lot of time with some pretty centers of influence, which helped me on my career. And that, whether it be an accounting firm, an investment banker, a private equity firm that I dealt with. You get the Mellon, obviously, they were doing probably less riskier situations. They just came out of the good bank, bad bank era. And also you had to deal with much more rigid credit policy, things of that nature. But it was an interesting experience, and I guess we'll get to this. Maybe I'll jump the gun on this a little bit. But you look at people who influenced my career, and we'll give a shout out to a guy named Walter Einhorn. And Walter Einhorn ran Mellon's asset-based group, which is called Mellon Business Credit. And Walter was old school. He was as old school as you can be. And I tell you, most kids these days wouldn't put up with what we put up with the old school. But, Walter sort of adopted me, and he also inherited me, because when I was hired by Pittsburgh folks, and Walter was in Philadelphia. And during the transition, my first 2 weeks at work, the group I was reporting to got assigned to Philadelphia under Walter's watch. And Walter was one of these guys who had a test. his employees to know what he had, and he didn't have a whole lot of time to do it. And some people might think it was sort of ruthless. I did it at that time, but as I reflect on it, it helped really develop who I am today, to the point that every year Walter gets a call. He's probably 80 years old now, but every year Walter gets a call for Christmas. And it might be a message or whatever. It's just, Walter, Merry Christmas and thank you for your positive impact on my career.
So he was a mentor.
Absolutely. And Walter, first meeting with Walter, first day I presented, he locked me in a room, and there was the two of us, and my boss was in there, and I know I'm exaggerating, but imagine, the spotlight on me, the heat's turned up, I'm in there sweating, and he's grilling me questions for like 4 hours. And at the end of it, I was exhausted. I was tired. I'm like, why am I here? Why am I working here? Why am I doing this? And then he had a secretary walked in with all the signed papers. And we did this 2 or 3 other times. And the first one was 4 hours. Next one was 3, 2. And we had a meeting, and to be pretty blunt about it, Walter, at the end of that last meeting, Walter said, I can read your mind. And I'm like, well, Walter, what do you mean? He goes, you want to reach across the table, grab me by my tie, and punch me in my face. And I said, Walter, that's pretty good. And he basically said, this will never happen again. I need to know who was going to be leading Pittsburgh. And I didn't have a whole lot of time to do it. And he goes, you're the one I targeted. You're the one I want to lead Pittsburgh. And I needed to know real quick whether you had the skill set, the ability to do that. And I didn't like it. Those 4 hours and 3 hours and 2 hours and 1 hour meeting. But after that meeting, Walter turned into a fantastic mentor and, a guy that I still rave about.
So talk about how you have applied that generationally and changed that over the course of time, because you're correct in that you and I have to lead very differently than we were led, both good and bad. Some of it's good because I think there's much more empowerment, much more opportunity at an earlier point in your career today than in the old school days. However, there's also a challenge to us because it's gone a lot the other way too, and there's a lot more flexibility and a different cultural mindset of other generations. So what are your thoughts?
It absolutely has. Young people today, old people today will not tolerate that. That was a generational thing that, that's the way he ran. I was fortunate enough to go to at that time there was a special school for that lending at Wharton that I had a chance to go to, and I had a chance to meet some of the most influential people in the asset-based world at Wharton. And I remember one guy get up there, and he was a legacy of all asset-based lenders out of New York City where it started, and he gave his speech about how he developed his people. And I went, God, I just went through that. And it was amazing. Today it's different. First of all, I think, and we've been fortunate enough to just bring in a student from IUP, and it was fortunate enough, and it's a whole different world. So these kids that are coming out of school right now, the young adults, they're brilliant. We're hiring the best of the best. At Citizens, we have that ability. And these young employees have great tools. They have great skills. They all want to make that, get to that plateau as quick as they can. And it's hard to slow them down. And sometimes you can't slow them down. Sometimes you just got to keep on feeding them and letting them run, which is good. But it's different. I think they got to learn that everything's just not analytical. There's the people side of the business. You can have all the right answers, but then how do you apply the answers? And that's really the part I think we can help them with. I can get them schedules, and they can put together these beautiful charts and graphs and numbers. But I think where we can really help them out is guide them through what the numbers mean and how do you apply those numbers. And a lot of it's just, Walter did it in a different way. His was a different approach, was a different era. I think our approach is, I don't want to say hand-holding, but it's more, I like to show by example. I don't like to tell. I like to lead by example. I like them to hang around with me. I bring them in on conference calls, sort of fly on the wall kind of approach. And I think that's worked out pretty well. I tell these students, the young ones, the interns or the young employees we have in our group, is you need to get yourself involved with every project imaginable, because that gets you a seat at the table. And it's important. So when we all go behind closed doors or we go into the conference room to discuss a project, if you work on that project, you get a seat at the table and you get to listen, and we're going to ask you for your input. And that's really where you grow. And so the employees we've seen who embrace that, who put forth extra effort, spend the extra time, do the extra research, they're the ones that are going to succeed. And we're going to help them mold that path for them, but they have to do it themselves.
Well, let's take and put you on the spot. Talk about a learning experience when maybe you were a BS employee, a tough boss, or your communication was not what it needed to be. Looking back, when do you think you might have been guilty of some BS? What did you learn from it that might help our listeners?
Well, I think we probably already hit that point. I mean, that first meeting that I was in with Mellon, when I was put in this conference room for 4 hours, just being drilled. I mean, I thought I was, sort of a criminal, in a police station. I learned at that point in time, at that time, the boss, I'll say he knew more than I did. He knew the answers more than I knew the answers. That he made sure he studied up on that and was just testing, what I was going to say to him. And I learned very early on, and I tell these kids now, it's okay to say you don't know. It's okay to say, I will find that out. It will okay to say, hey, it's in the annual report. Let me go get it. I tell them right now is there's a game, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And you get to call somebody, you get to ask the audience, you get to look at papers. And I think once you get out of school, life's an open book test. And, I probably learned it the hard way by trying to act like I knew the right answer and I was going to sort of make something up. But I learned pretty early on that's the wrong thing to do. The best thing to do is if you don't know the exact answer, say you don't know the exact answer. If you're going to make a educated guess, you table it as an educated guess that you're going to go back and within a very short period of time come back with the right answer.
Hear more of my interview with Don Haddad on part 2